Did you know your thyroid and your digestive tract are very closely connected? Today, we're diving deep into this connection, and we're going to discuss 7 key ways that your thyroid can impact your digestive system and what you can do about it.
Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor Podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Shook, and today we're exploring a topic that's crucial for many of you. And this is the connection between hypothyroidism, or a low thyroid, and gut health. And if you've ever felt like your thyroid issues might be affecting your digestion, you're not alone. So let's unravel the relationship, discuss some of the most common problems that I see, and what you can do about it. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is just discuss, why is the digestive tract and the thyroid, why are they connected? What is the connection? And really, it's not just the connection to your gut, but your thyroid is connected to every single tissue in the body. And that's because at a very basic and fundamental level, every cell in your body, which when you put cells together, they make a tissue. And when you put tissues together, they make organs. And when you put organs together, they make systems. And when you put systems together, they make you. So if you think about this, every cell needs thyroid hormone to produce energy so that it can carry out its physiological functions. So if you have any level of thyroid deficiency, you're going to have problems with the cell functioning normally. This is a major issue. I mean, just at a very, at the basic cellular level, if the cells are deficient in thyroid hormone, even to a small degree, you're going to have inefficiency of energy production, and you will have accelerated aging of the tissues. So one of the worst things for our health is to be hypothyroid, and especially if you're hypothyroid or have low thyroid hormone for a prolonged period of time, it really can create significant degeneration and is very hard on your body. So one of the things that occurs with hypothyroidism is that you don't get the normal GI tract activation. And so whenever you digest food, one of the physiological functions of your digestive tract is that you will have, the stomach will go through these contractions where it helps to break down and churn the food that's in the stomach. And then once the food leaves the stomach and it goes into the small intestine, the gallbladder will contract and release bile into the food. The pancreas will release enzymes into the food. And then that food will make its way through the GI tract, through the small and large intestine, until you eliminate it. And the intestines, they have a wave-like contraction of the muscles that are part of them. And this is called peristalsis. It's a normal wave-like contraction of your digestive tract that helps to move the food through your intestines and ultimately so that you can eliminate it. And this process, all of these processes, can be dampened and can be inefficient and not as strong as they should be. And what this can do is this leads to poor digestion and a number of problems. One of the things that, the most common symptom that people report with hypothyroidism as it relates to their digestive tract is constipation. So this is how it's connected. It's really that the thyroid is critical for every single cell, every tissue, every organ, every system in the body. And if it's deficient, you can have problems. But as far as it goes with the GI tract, that's just a little bit of an overview to give you some context before we get into these specific things that I see happening pretty commonly. Now that you better understand the connection let's go through the most common GI symptoms that I see in my clients that have a low thyroid. So there are about 7 different things here that I want to touch on. The first thing that you need to be aware of is intestinal motility. And I already talked about this, where the smooth muscle contractions that occur, they actually occur if you imagine your intestine as a tube. And these smooth muscle contractions of the intestine, they contract in a wave-like fashion. So they begin to contract at the top of the tube, and then they, almost in a wave, they move down the length of the tube. And this helps to kind of move the food through the intestinal tract. And it's like this, almost like this milking type of movement that moves the food through. And this is called peristalsis. And this is, the thyroid hormone, as I just mentioned, is really critical for these contractions. And without them, you have issues like constipation. And something that can occur and that not a lot of people are aware of, when you don't move your food through your bowels efficiently, you can actually have bacterial overgrowth. And this bacterial overgrowth can create all kinds of problems with gas and bloating and discomfort, but it can also, it's a disruption in the normal bacteria in the gut, and it can create problems with your intestinal lining, making it more leaky and permeable, which sets you up for a lot of inflammation and can even be a gateway for autoimmunity. So something as simple as not being able to move the food through your digestive tract efficiently could set up bacterial imbalances, lead to intestinal permeability or leaky gut, which can be and is known to be a gateway for autoimmunity and a lot of inflammation and other health problems. So this is something that we want to be really aware of. And intestinal motility, if you're not having regular bowel movements, and I really like for people to have bowel movements daily, that is usually the best frequency. If you're not, and if your stools are really hard, or if they're hard and infrequent, these are all warning signs, because if that's persistent, that can really lead to some other problems. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And there are a lot of things that you can consider doing and I'll talk about that when I finish here. It really, a lot of this comes down to optimizing the thyroid, but there are other things that you can do to support the digestive tract, and you try to do as many things as possible at one time without it being overwhelming. It has to be practical enough to actually implement. So we'll talk about some of those things at the end. Now, the second problem that I've noticed is that there are issues with the gallbladder. And I have seen so many of my clients that have had cholecystectomies where they remove the gallbladder. It's the gallbladder surgery. And this is important, and this occurs with hypothyroidism, that gallbladder problems develop because one of the things that the thyroid hormone does to the gallbladder is that it helps with gallbladder contraction. Just like the smooth muscle, the wave-like contractions of the intestine, the gallbladder also contracts to release bile. And if this does not occur, if you're not getting good contractions and release of bile, and this can happen, there's more than just the thyroid that plays into this picture, but it can be a very significant part of the piece of the puzzle here, then you can start to develop what would be called and referred to as bile sludge and even gallstones. And when that occurs, it can be a much more difficult thing to correct. And a lot of times this leads to the gallbladder being removed, which, if you've had your gallbladder removed and you've had a good experience with it, then great. But a lot of people, it does not fix their problems, and it can actually lead to persistent issues with their digestion, because what happens is when the gallbladder is removed, the common bile duct, it becomes the gallbladder. And what happens is that there's typically this constant drip of bile into the small intestine, and it can just make I've I've talked to people with a lot of different experiences, but a very common experience is that they have persistent diarrhea, that anything they eat, they have to go immediately. And this is obviously not good for a lot of different reasons, but so the gallbladder can be affected. And there are, it's more than just the gallbladder not contracting. Maybe there's bacterial overgrowth that's occurring. Maybe there are issues with the metabolism and the utilization of cholesterol, and that is contributing to gallstones. There are so many things that could be occurring here, but having a hypothyroid and a low thyroid or suboptimal thyroid function is absolutely a risk factor for gallbladder issues. So that's the second thing. You see the gallbladder and some pretty significant issues that can occur. The third thing that I see that's really common is leaky gut. And this is something I kind of touched on. And as you'll see, a lot of these things are connected, and they have similar threads to their how the problem develops. Right, the thyroid is hormone output is not sufficient, and that leads to typically a slower digestive tract. And with that diminished or decreased ability to digest food, to produce enzymes and hydrochloric acid to properly break the food down, you get this digestion, this poor digestion. You get poor elimination of the digesting food, so it sits in the stomach more, and then this causes bacterial changes that are detrimental to your health. And leaky gut is basically where the gut lining becomes permeable, hyperpermeable. Your digestive tract lining is, especially the small intestine, is very permeable anyway, because as your food that you're eating is digesting, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, basically, and then that is able to move through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream, and then those vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and the building blocks for your tissues and for the things that your body needs to carry out normal physiology are able to make their way into the bloodstream where the body can use it. But whenever you have, let's just say, for example, in this example, you have poor peristalsis, right? You're not moving the food through the gut. Your food can stay in the digestive tract longer than it should really be there. This causes bacterial overgrowth and imbalance. This can create an inflammatory environment, which may irritate the mucus layer that is on top of your cells of the intestinal lining, and this can cause inflammation, and then again bacterial colonization of bacteria that you don't want, and this can lead to a breakdown in the intestinal lining. And the scientific term that you'll find in the scientific literature is intestinal permeability or intestinal hyperpermeability, and the lay term for it, how it's commonly referred to, amongst people, and kind of like a term that has gained a lot of traction on social media and whatnot, is leaky gut. And it's just an easy way to illustrate that and give you this picture of a leaking intestinal lining letting things into the bloodstream, and it's a pretty effective and an accurate description. So leaky gut can lead to a lot of poorly digested food proteins, bacterial cell wall fragments. So bacteria and everything that live in the gut, they go through a life cycle, right? And as the bacteria that normally inhabit the gut, as they die, they will fragment, and they get carried out by your stool, in the stool. But if they're if you're not having regular bowel movements, and those bacteria are just sitting there and they're overgrowing, as the bacteria die, the bacterial cells fragment, and the cell walls of some of the bacteria, especially gram-negative bacteria, contain lipopolysaccharides, a very significantly inflammatory compound that's found in the bacterial cell walls. And if that translocates, meaning moves from inside the intestine through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream, it's called endotoxemia. It's an endotoxin, and it is a very inflammatory It's very, very inflammatory, and it can drive an inflammatory response, and it may very well be a very significant contributing factor to the triggering and perpetuation of autoimmunity. But it absolutely will create very significant inflammation systemically. So though it's happening in the digestive tract, this will create inflammation throughout the circulatory system. This will create inflammation that will absolutely cross through the blood-brain barrier into the brain and affect brain health and function and cognition. This may be a contributing factor to brain fog, and there are a lot of potential other negative health consequences to this. So, this is really leaky gut, which can be caused by this hypothyroid state through the digestive tract. The being slow really can promote a significant amount of systemic inflammation, and it can even create a vicious cycle. One of the things it could actually perpetuate and activate and flare up the autoimmune process very significantly. And let's not overlook that. I mean, the number one reason that people have a low thyroid is because of Hashimoto's. It's an autoimmune thyroid condition that leads to thyroid tissue destruction and ultimately low thyroid hormone. And this is one of the things that we have to address. We have to consider the gut. It's not always a factor, but it's very commonly a factor in people that have Hashimoto's, and in most people that are autoimmune. You really have to look at the gut and support the intestinal lining health and do everything that you can to get the intestinal tract and function optimal, and so that, because if you can, what happens is you get into these vicious cycles, and where, let's say, you develop this leaky gut, and then this produces inflammation and drives the autoimmune process, and that causes thyroid destruction, and then the thyroid destruction leads to less thyroid hormone, which leads to poor gut function, and then the poor gut function leads to the inflammation, and it's this cycle. And these cycles, there are many of these that can occur, and what you want to do in those situations is address every point that you can in the cycle to try and disrupt it. And that's really important. So leaky gut's critical that we consider and that we address. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is oral tolerance, and oral tolerance is a very important concept. And I have an entire podcast on this, so I'm not going to go into it too much, except to give you a high overview. And so this is really the concept is when you have a low thyroid, you're in a low thyroid state. It can cause your immune system to be overreactive to foods, and it can lead to sensitivities to foods and more inflammation. And this really comes down to disrupting your GI tract bacterial balance, your intestinal lining, decreased integrity of the intestinal lining. And then this causes, this leaky gut. And as your immune system, which is on, in your bloodstream, and if you think about the intestinal lining as, on one side of the intestinal lining, you have digesting food and bacteria, the things inside your GI tract. And on the other side of the intestinal lining, you have the bloodstream and the immune system. And if you think about it that way, it's easier to conceptualize. But if you have food proteins that are digesting and these bacteria that are dying off and things in the GI tract that are passing through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, and it drives this inflammatory response, then what happens is your immune system becomes hyperactive, and it starts reacting to a lot of things, and you become more sensitive and more reactive to things that are coming through into the bloodstream, and you start reacting to more and more foods and more food proteins, and you lose tolerance to those things. And this is bad. You want oral tolerance, not only because you want to be able to calm down the immune system, but also because you want to be able to eat other foods and not be reactive to everything. So you can start to lose oral tolerance to the foods. Okay, number 5 is blood flow to the gut. So there's so many factors here. When we talked about how a low thyroid state causes decreased smooth muscle contraction of the intestines, right? Decreased peristalsis is the smooth muscle contractions, wave-like smooth muscle contractions of the intestinal tract itself. When, we talked about that, and that is a neurological So the nervous system is the brain and the vagus nerve. They're activating the enteric nervous system, and this coordination of things is occurring here. Well, you can also have decreased blood flow, and this is really common too. This is one of the most common symptoms is cold hands, cold feet, cold tip of the nose, and that's because you have poor perfusion. You have your metabolic rate has decreased, and you get diminished endothelial nitric oxide activation, or ENOS. It is nitric oxide when it's activated. And I'm talking about endothelial. There are a few different types of nitric oxide, but the endothelial nitric oxide, when it's activated, it stimulates blood flow. And you need blood flow to get thyroid hormone, vitamins, minerals, nutrients to all of these tissues throughout the body. And if you don't have good blood flow, then you're going to have a lot of problems with the tissues that are being starved of blood and oxygen and these essential vitamins and minerals. So, I mean, it's obviously, a critical thing to have blood flow to your tissues. And so when you're hypothyroid, you can have diminished blood flow to the gut. And this can create a lot of issues with the regeneration and recovery of the intestinal lining. So think about this for a second. So the intestinal lining has a very rapid turnover rate, which is a great thing because that means that we have the potential to heal the intestinal lining pretty rapidly, but you have to get blood flow to it, and you have this incredible network of blood vessels to the intestine. And I remember studying this when I was in gross anatomy, and we studied the blood flow and the different major vessels to the intestines, and it's just this fascinating and just unbelievably complex and intricate system. And if you don't get significant or sufficient blood flow to the intestine, then you're not going to recover and heal the intestinal lining. So this is critical. So you see how all of these things could be caused by not having sufficient thyroid hormone activity in the body. And I say activity, and I don't want to digress too far here because it's not just how much thyroid hormone you have. You also have the quantity of your thyroid hormone is absolutely, it's important. But you can have too little thyroid hormone and you can have too much, which has its own problems. But there is the production or the quantity of the hormone is one thing. Then you have, when you have thyroid hormone, it has to be transported through the blood, which is there are little carrier proteins where you can have problems there. And then you have to have sensitivity once the thyroid hormone gets through the circulatory system to the cells where it's needed. You have to have the cells have to be receptive to the thyroid hormone, and then once your cells use it, you have to be able to clear it or detoxify it. And so this this is related to the thyroid. It's not just the quantity though. You have to be able to transport it, get it there. Your body has to use it, and then your body needs to clear the thyroid hormone. But blood flow is absolutely critical for regeneration of the lining of the gut. So hypothyroidism can definitely diminish blood flow. So the next thing, our sixth topic here is gut metabolic activity. So if you think about this again, every single cell in the body requires thyroid hormone so that it can carry out its physiological processes. So if your body's metabolism is diminished, if it's not sufficient due to this low thyroid state, then you're not going to have normal metabolic activity in the gut. And this means that the cellular the capacity of the cells that line the gut, we talked about like the intestinal motility, that's one aspect of this as well, is going to be diminished. So just the metabolic activity and ability to recover is going to be significantly if affected in a negative way. The cells just can't carry out their normal physiological function, because for normal cellular function you have to have sufficient thyroid hormone levels, oxygen levels, and you have to have normal glucose levels, which is your blood sugar. And this is so that you can produce ATP, which is your energy molecule, that is required for the cells to to carry out their functions. So gut metabolic activity is also very important. And then the last thing that I really want to touch on here is the gut microbiome. And I've already kind of weaved this in a bit, but I want to highlight this because I think as an individual thing, we need to point this out, and I need to be clear here that the microbiome, so this entire group of bacteria and microorganisms in the gut, with Hashimoto's patients, it typically is different. I mean, if you were to look at the people with Hashimoto's and people without, it differs pretty significantly from those without it. And this microbiome in your digestive tract is really important. It has a very significant impact on the immune system because the bacteria in the gut produce different types of postbiotics. So as a byproduct of their metabolism, they make things like short-chain fatty acids. And this is important to have sufficient production of these things so that it keeps your intestinal lining healthy. It also, the immune cells in the gut are in a better, less reactive state. So this is also something that's very important. Okay, so now that we have gone in super deep on a lot of the potential consequences of hypothyroidism and its impact on the digestive tract, let's talk about some potential solutions. And as with all of the podcasts and all the information I share, this is not medical advice. This is informational in nature, and this may apply to you, but you need to check with your doctor first or find and work with a qualified functional medicine practitioner that can help you to formulate a plan specific to you. And this is something I want to highlight. I'm going to talk about some potential solutions, but it's very hard to be extremely specific. There are a few things we can be specific on, but ultimately, the approach that is going to work is going to be the one that is tailored to you, or that is best tailored to you. So let's talk about some of the potential solutions and how we can break this cycle of low thyroid activity and poor gut health. Okay, so the first thing and the most important thing is you need to make sure that your thyroid hormone is within an optimal range. Okay, so you can't be in a hypothyroid state and have normal GI tract function. It's just not going to happen. And this is, because of everything we just discussed. So you need to have your doctor, be working with your doctor, or again, a functional medicine practitioner, check your TSH levels, because that is the best indication of your body's need for thyroid hormone. And really shoot for, my preference, or the functional range, what is probably optimal for human physiology, is somewhere between like 1.5 for TSH now, 1.5 to about 2.5. And I know that's a really narrow range. When you look at the laboratory range, if you were to get your TSH checked, or if you were to look at some of your lab results, you'll see that the TSH on the low end is about 0.5, and on the high end is around 4.5, sometimes 5.0. And that's the range. And if you're within that range, then your doctor typically says, hey, you're fine. You don't need thyroid hormone replacement. And, there are a lot of factors here. In an ideal situation, you would have more markers than just your TSH. You would have T4, T3, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and you would have some other markers like thyroid peroxidase antibodies, TPO antibodies, and thyroglobulin antibodies. And these give you an indication of whether or not the immune system is attacking the thyroid and if you have Hashimoto's. Now, you may know that, but you may already know if you have Hashimoto's, but those are very good to have because you want to make sure, first of all, that you have enough quantity of thyroid hormone in circulation. But as I said earlier, the quantity of hormone that you have in circulation is not the only factor. You can have plenty of thyroid hormone and still have low thyroid hormone activity in the body. So let me give you a real quick example of that. You could be taking a thyroid hormone replacement, your TSH could be perfect, your T4 and T3 could look good, but you still don't feel well. Now, why is that? Well, there are several reasons, but one theoretical reason where the quantity of thyroid hormone is not the only factor, you could have a high level of inflammation. So if you were to check like high sensitivity C-reactive protein and your erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or some of these other markers, but primarily high sensitivity C-reactive protein, for example, if you were to check that and if it's elevated, then the inflammatory chemistry has an effect on your cellular sensitivity to thyroid hormone. So you can actually have normal quantity of the hormone, but not have the sensitivity. Once the thyroid gets to the cells where it's needed, it doesn't affect it the same way. It has a diminished sensitivity or responsiveness. So that's an example. There are other examples that are pretty common in women, where if you have like an estrogen dominance, or if you're taking like a birth control or a hormone replacement therapy that has estrogen, if your estrogen's too high, you will disrupt the transportation of the thyroid hormone through the bloodstream. So there's quantity, which is production of thyroid hormone. If you just remember PTSD, production, transportation, sensitivity, detoxification, that's going to kind of cover a lot of the ways that the thyroid hormone physiology breaks down. So production is your quantity. So you can just check the box on, hey, TSH looks good, T4 looks good, T3 looks good, and you can get this idea about quantity. But if you still don't feel well, there's a problem. Don't ignore the obvious. If you don't feel well and your numbers look fine, then something's being missed. Period. I mean, that's just how it goes. So inflammation can be disruptive. High estrogens can disrupt the transportation part, the T. And one of the ways this occurs is for your thyroid hormone to get throughout the body, it gets carried on a little carrier protein in the blood. This is called a thyroid binding globulin. And this globulin is a protein, and what it does, it binds to your thyroid hormone, carries it through the bloodstream, and then whenever it gets to where the thyroid hormone needs to go, let's say it's made in your thyroid gland, and the thyroid hormone is released into your circulation. Let's say, just imagine in your neck, it binds to a transport protein, one of these thyroid binding globulins. It carries it through the circulatory system, and let's say it makes it to the toe, and at the toe it's needed, and it disassociates it comes off of the little carrier protein, and then it's a free floating thyroid hormone that can attach to the cell. Well, if you have a lot of estrogens, you can create a state in the body where there are too many of these little carrier proteins in the blood, and they bind up all of the thyroid hormone, and there's not enough of it free floating for the body to use. And you can get ideas if this is happening by looking at your total T4, your free T4, your total T3, and your free T3, and kind of looking to see if there's a huge discrepancy. Like, are they, where, like if your total values are real high, but your free values are low. You can also look at T3 uptake, which is another marker that can give you an indirect measure of this, and give you a much better idea if the transportation's, if there's a problem with transportation. But so it's more than just the quantity of the hormone. So I want to, put all this in perspective to let you know that, yes, you can look at the production and the amount of thyroid hormone, but that is not the only factor. The transportation, the sensitivity at the cell, these are all things that can be disrupted and that need to be considered. So checking your TSH is a good thing to do, right? The next thing would be screening for Hashimoto's thyroiditis. 9 out of 10 people with a low thyroid have Hashimoto's. If you have Hashimoto's, it's an autoimmune disease, and the reason for your thyroid problem is your immune system is attacking the thyroid. It's not your thyroid is the problem, it's that your immune system is mistakenly attacking your thyroid and destroying the tissue, causing you to not be able to make enough thyroid hormone. So you have to, to really have the most optimal health and the best chance at a good outcome, you need to be considering addressing and doing something about the autoimmune process. And there are a ton of things that we do from a functional medicine perspective to try and help people. And you want to look at what's happening with that person, and then try to figure out as many strategies as you can to help their immune system to function more normally. And the framework that I use is a detect, remove, repair framework. And, detect the triggers of the autoimmunity. If you can do food sensitivity testing, pathogen screening, chemical immune reactivity screening, looking for things that are driving the immune response. And then once you test those, specifically, remove the things that you're reacting to try and diminish the immune system reactivity. Then you want to support, at the same time, you want to support and make sure that there's adequate vitamin D, adequate essential fatty acids. The omega-3, omega-6s are in balance so that you can have a more normal immune response. And vitamin D is critical at the immune response. And if you're deficient, it can create a lot of problems for the orchestration of the inflammatory process with the immune system. It can create a lot of problems. So optimal vitamin D, optimal omega-3 to omega-6 levels, that's real important for inflammation as well and immune system function. Making sure you're not deficient in vitamins and minerals. These are all things that are critical just for basic physiology to occur. Okay, so there's that kind of stuff, and then there are other things that you need to do. I mean, for sure, the gut health and trying to support the gut if it's needed. The lifestyle factors and dietary factors are critical, which are very expansive. So, we'll be talking for a few hours if I go into a lot of detail on those things, but I have a ton of information on these other aspects. So I need to, just try to stay with a specific enough overview for you, but I can't go into that much detail. It just takes us too long. So TSH, checking TSH, checking to see if you have Hashimoto's. If you do have Hashimoto's, do not ignore the autoimmunity. Do not ignore that. It's ignored all the time because 9 out of 10 people that have a low thyroid have Hashimoto's. Most people don't know that. They have no idea they have Hashimoto's, and that is a huge mistake in my opinion. It's a huge mistake because you can do so many things to decrease that autoimmune process, decrease the inflammation, and it impacts so many other aspects of your health that you don't even realize. A lot of people, they're normal. They don't even know what feeling good truly is anymore because their normal day to day is just what they experience, how how they feel, and they think that's normal and that's what everyone else experiences. When it's not. It's not. They just, their body has adjusted to this new state of normal, which is this real, unfortunately lesser version of themselves, and that's not fair. That's not how you want to live your life. So there's a lot you can do about it. The next thing that you really want to do is evaluate your diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors. And this is where you really look at and try to identify potential autoimmune triggers, which is kind of what I just alluded to. The known triggers of autoimmunity that are pretty well documented in the scientific literature fall into 3 different categories. Primarily, it's food proteins that you're reacting to immunologically, pathogens, and pathogens fall into this, it's an umbrella term for viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi that you're reacting to immunologically, and then also chemicals. We know that chemicals can actually trigger immune responses too. When they get into the body, they can actually bind to your tissues and create these things called neoantigens, and it is just, there's a lot there to wrap your head around. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is there are triggers that are known. They're documented in the scientific literature, things that activate the immune response and autoimmunity, and that can also perpetuate and drive it. So what we try to do is get the unique fingerprint for you, and then try to reverse or dampen the immune reactivity by taking those things out of your diet and environment for a period of time. And while we're supporting healing your intestinal lining and your barrier systems, getting the immune system and your physiology working more optimally, getting your diet and lifestyle factors optimized to support those things as well. And that's how you really can have, some of the best outcomes. So evaluating diet, lifestyle, and these environmental factors. Detect, remove, repair is a strategy that, again, I utilize. And it's taking a whole body approach where you're not just, taking probiotics and thyroid hormones, but you're actually addressing the underlying autoimmunity and its triggers. If you found this episode helpful, please share and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. You can join our Facebook group, the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group with over 11,000 members, and you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brad Shook. And remember, together, we can make a difference. Remember, your body is a complex system and everything's connected. By understanding these relationships between your thyroid and your gut, you're taking a significant step towards better health. So keep seeking knowledge, stay curious, and always prioritize your well-being. Until next time, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.